Well, the 70s, one thing you can say with absolute clarity about that particular decade is that it was a very mixed-up kid. Musically, it went from the cheerful pleasures of glam rockers Slade and teen idols, Bay City Rollers, to the up-yours stance of the Sex Pistols and the anarchic frenzy of the Damned. On television, the reassurance of Dixon of Dock Green was replaced by the grittiness of the Sweeney, and dear old Blue Peter came under serious threat from the new lords of misrule, Tiswas. Now, to anyone under 25 who's grown up knowing nothing other than Conservative Prime Ministers and Chancellors of the Exchequer, the next few minutes may add to your confusion. Now, it may seem strange to you now, but 20-odd years ago, voters still occasionally gave the Labour Party a crack of the whip. In fact, between 1970 and 1979, the Socialists, as they were still proud to call themselves in those days, formed 3 out of the 5 governments that shuffled in and out of Downing Street.
Hello, and if you just tuned in, don't worry, this isn't a credit card commercial. You know, I've been rummaging around in my wardrobe and I found some exceedingly silly things from the 70s that I thought I'd got rid of. Like this, for example.
Oh, hi there. Can anyone remember who I used to be?
No, but I'll give you a clue. When you were on the telly, you had the expression of a space hopper who'd just been set on by Demis Roussos. And then you just disappeared.
My God, I must be Jonathan King.
No. You were never as politically successful. You had to make do with being a Tory Prime Minister. Don't you remember what you were doing between 1970 and 1974?
Yes, I do. 3 things. 1, reversing socialism. 2, cutting prices at a stroke. And 3, playing with my clackers.
You never did marry, did you, Ted?
What? No. Honestly, Dennis, clackers were things that made a loud, irritating noise, and if you weren't careful, they'd hit you in the face.
No, that was Clive Jenkins.
Was it? Oh. Yes, now, wait a minute, yes, I can remember John Travolta and Saturday Night Fever.
Ah, yes. And do you remember, what did we call them now? You know, the things when lights went on and off all the time.
Oh, you mean disco?
No, the power cuts, yes. They were all the rage when you were at number 10, Ted.
Yes,
and there were 3-day weeks, petrol vouchers, and wasn't it you who got rid of free school milk?
No, I seem to remember it was some woman who did that. Yes, mad staring eyes, never allowed any sharp objects. Right, I wonder what happened to her.
I know.
Yes, well, never mind. What I can remember about the 70s were all those idiotic ideas that nobody's heard of since.
Oh, yes, like brushed denim flared trousers.
No, I was thinking more of Labour governments. You don't see any of those anymore, do you? No. Don't you remember the winter of discontent? That was a terrible Labour idea from the 70s. Yes, you gave us record strikes, a trade deficit, massive inflation, and village people at number 1 in the charts for 5 weeks.
It was nowhere near as bad as that.
Wasn't it?
No, they were only at number 1 for 3 weeks. But there was never any crisis.
Oh, no. Well, thanks to you, for months we had rubbish piled up in Leicester Square.
Well, that's nothing. For over 14 years we've had trash in Downing Street.
Yes, well, I'd agree with you there, Dennis.
Yes. You know, if I'd known in 1975 what I know now in 1994, I'd have handled all the country's debts entirely differently as Chancellor.
Really? How?
Easy peasy. I'd have put it all on my credit card.
Thank you, gentlemen. Well, we can laugh now, but in Britain it was a time of political confusion, chaos and sex scandals, and yes, there will be more of that in a moment. Well, there is one of a very few union leaders who tried to form close links with each administration, and that was Jack Jones. Now, Jack, did those famous sort of beer and sandwich meetings at number 10 ever produce any results?
Well, of course they did. In 1974... the Labour government came in and we introduced the trade unions and the Labour government together conciliation and arbitration, trying to bring justice into industry, and trying to ensure that people had the right to appeal against unfair dismissals, trying to ensure that payment was made during redundancy, trying to ensure that there was reasonable wages paid, and above all, that we had a pay policy that was fair to everybody.
Well, now, the political landscape in the 70s was a world away from today, but as always, the papers were interested in scandal, political and personal, anything as long as it was juicy. Now, Derek Jameson, you worked for left-wing and right-wing papers throughout that whole period, and so obviously this gives you quite an advantage. Did the papers treat it any differently in those days from now?
They were a bit more restrained, I suppose. In 1973, the News of the World had a photographer behind the wall, behind a two-way mirror, and focused onto a bed where was Lord Lambton, the Under-Secretary of State for Defence, with two ladies of easy virtue, one white and one black. And they had all the pictures. And would you believe, Michael, they didn't have the bottle to publish them. They agonised for days, should we publish these pictures? And in the end, they decided no, they wouldn't. So they gave them back to the man who organised the picture session, who took them straight to the People, a rival of the News of the World, and the Sunday People ran the story. Now, today, an editor wouldn't worry about should I publish these pictures. He'd be there at the first possible minute on the front page. So I suppose we were a bit more restrained, a bit more moderate in those days, 20 years ago, than today. But the main change is in newspaper competition, not in ethics or standards.
There was, of course, something we do know about, the great juicy luncheon voucher scandal, when men were queuing for sexual services in suburban London, which became another of your exclusives, and the hostess was Cynthia Payne. Cynthia, who was buying your luncheon vouchers? Just remind us.
Well, nobody from the Daily Star. But I will say one for them. They did pick me up in a Rolls Royce outside Holloway Prison, and I left in style. I remember that. And they took me away to a nice, and we had champagne breakfast, all on Derek Jameson's. They put me in a bath. I remember that, pouring champagne all over me. And it was wonderful, really, because in those days, you know, it was naughty but nice. And you see, we knew we were doing something we shouldn't, so we enjoyed it all the more. But now, I mean, anything goes.
Well, do you think the party took off, particularly then in the 70s, because it was so, you know, people were getting liberated?
Well, I think it was going on everywhere, really, but I just think my parties were more homely, and because they were... I think because they were more homely, I think it made headlines. I think selling luncheon vouchers at the door for my parties. That was for food, drink, and a lady of their own choice. Oh. I mean, they called me the Freddie Laker of sex, and let's face it, I went bust like he did.
In 1970, an annual event that always attracted the attention of millions took on a special significance. I was there at the Royal Albert Hall when Bob Hope, who was hosting the event live on television, was stopped in mid-flow by a fast-moving bag of flour. A commando of feminists, or bra burners as they were labelled then, were trying to stop the show, but order was soon restored and normal business resumed.
Traditional for everyone to disagree with the judges. Well, there are always 2 points of view, so this is a convenient moment to see the other point of view. Girls, would you please turn? And lovely, there you are, all round. Please, will you turn? Oh, there we are.
What is your answer to the people who accuse us seriously of being a petrol show and the rest of it? How do you feel?
I think it's complete nonsense, I really do.
Well, obviously, otherwise you wouldn't be here. You've had lots of travel in the past year. Where have you been?
Yes, I've been to Japan, and I've been out to the States, too.
Japan and the States?
Yes.
Well, that's not bad. If your beauty career was to end tonight, what would you do for a living?
I think I'd go back to my hairdressing. I'd have a hairdressing salon, and also I'd like to have a dress shop, too.
A hairdressing salon and a dress shop. Well, good luck in those. Thank you very much, Miss United Kingdom.
The now reviled Miss World competition. I came third that year. Now, the one on the left there was the British representative, Yvonne Orme, now Yvonne Mackenzie. How do you feel about it now, Yvonne?
I'd still do the same again. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
We had some good times in the 70s, and it was very glamorous, which I don't think there's a lot of glamour around these days.
Were you embarrassed by the protesters?
No, not at all, no. Perhaps a little bit frightened, because when we were in the Albert Hall, they actually got underneath in the Albert Hall. And, it was quite frightening, really, because they disrupted the programme quite a lot.
Anna Rayburn, did you sympathise with the protesters?
No, I never thought anything was to be achieved by throwing chunks of flour and being disagreeable. I think if the choice was between a boring dead-end job and the opportunity, and you had the furniture, as you obviously had, and you could go into a beauty competition, good luck.
Because boys box, don't they, to get away from their circumstances?
Yes, you take the road you can take. If that's what's open to you, you do it. And if the world was to say that everybody who has ever entered a beauty competition or made a dubious movie or appeared in a doubtful show should not be entitled to stardom, then we would be awfully short of stars.
Helen Morgan, you were Miss World in 1974, but you only had that title for 4 days. What went wrong?
Well, the press sort of descended on me and various revelations of me being an unmarried mother. And I just felt so much pressure that I resigned.
Now, was that because of the morality of the time, or was it the strict kind of regulations of the organisation who ran Miss World?
I think it was both. I think I'd felt that I'd let the Miss World competition down. And I didn't like everybody pointing a finger at me and saying, oh, you must be a bad person, you're an unmarried mother. I felt I hadn't done anything wrong, and I didn't like being in a situation where people were criticising me. So I thought by stepping down, I'd just get out of the limelight and disappear.
Now, Derek Jameson, you produced papers that featured topless girls, so feminism didn't breach Fleet Street?
Not at all, no. We've always held them at bay, Michael. I mean, you've got to do your own thing. Page 3 girls don't sell newspapers. They sell newspapers to a tiny minority, a small percentage of young adolescent males, teenagers. And, of course, you have to remember the majority of people who go and buy a newspaper across the counter in the shop are women. So if Page 3 girls were that offensive to the female species, they wouldn't buy the newspaper, would they?
Well, we have a couple of girls here now, Nina Carter and Gilly Johnson, who were both pioneers in this very field. You made names for yourselves as Page 3 girls. Did you find that a liberating experience? Did you feel you were being exploited?
Exploited? Not at all. We just had a lot of fun, didn't we? Brilliant. It was a great stepping stone to other things in life. We made lots of money, travelled the world.
Had a wild and wonderful time. Yes. Wonderful time.
If people recognise you in the street there, did they just tug their forelock in your direction, or do they do?
I think we were treated with respect.
Yes.
I think that in those days, Page 3 was a classy thing to be linked to. In those days.
Well, it's now become a British institution and certainly a way of life.
Now, Angela Rippon, you, of course, were featured on all the other pages of every other newspaper because you read the news. Now, were you treated as an equal, or do you feel you were an oddity?
Oh, I was treated in the pages of the newspaper very much as an oddity, which I found extraordinary at the time, because it wasn't as if women journalists or women newsreaders were a new phenomena. But when I started to read the news, I don't suppose you could have got more publicity if you'd had the first Martian reading the news. And it was almost as if the papers were saying, not the public, but the papers were saying, not here is a woman doing the news, but my gosh, isn't it extraordinary that she can do it at all? And I actually found it very, very frustrating and rather annoying that they were trying to trivialise and marginalise what I was doing for a living, which was a perfectly professional and competent job, equal to any of my male colleagues, and yet somehow I was being treated as a total oddity.
Well, I was a TV newsreader for a while in the 60s. In those days, viewers didn't think that newsreaders had legs. But in 1976, Angela changed all that.
A report on the economy has just come through from number 11 Downing Street. The Chancellor's statement reads as follows. There may be trouble ahead, but while there's moonlight and music and love and romance...
Let's face the music and dance!
Proud moment, eh? they still listen to you read the news afterwards as well. The 70s version of White Tie and Tails was white suit and belly button, embellished by a tasteful medallion and, if necessary, a chest wig. The disco had arrived from America. After the break, we'll do a bit of grooving and revive a few tender TV memories. But here is a genuine example of the finest British disco beat from The Real Thing.
Falling if you ask me to. I'd do anything for you, your wish is my command. I could move a mountain when your hand is in my hand. Ooh, words could not express how much you mean to me. There must be some other way to make you see. If it takes my heart and soul, you know I'd pay the price. Everything that I possess, I gladly sacrifice. Oh, you to me are everything, the sweetest song that I can sing. Oh, baby, oh, baby. To you, I guess I'm just a clown who picks you up each time you're down. Oh, baby, oh, baby. You give me just a taste of love to build my hopes upon. You know you got the power, girl, to keep me holding on. So now you got the best of me. Come on and take the rest of me, oh baby. Though you're close to me, we seem so far apart. Maybe given time, you'll have a change of heart. It takes forever, girl, then I'm prepared to wait. The day you give your love to me won't be a day too late. Oh, you to me are everything, the sweetest song that I could sing. Oh, baby, oh, baby. To you, I guess I'm just a clown who picks you up each time you're down. Oh, baby, oh, baby. You give me just a taste of love to build my hopes upon. You know you got the power, girl, to keep me holding on. So now you got the best of me. Come on and take the rest of me, oh baby. Oh, you to me are everything, the sweetest song that I can sing. Oh baby, oh baby, oh baby. You know I need you, girl. You to me are everything, the sweetest song that I can sing. Oh baby, oh baby. Oh, you to me are everything, the sweetest song that I can sing. Oh baby, oh baby.
Hello? Oh, shut up. It's surprising, you know, how many grown-ups remember that cheap and cheerful little 70s programme. Children all over the country wrote to me at the BBC begging to see their favourite TV clips. Some of them wrote nearly every week. And our researchers have tracked down one regular correspondent. He lives in Willesden. His name is Tony. And this is what he looked like then, and this is what he looks like now. Vivid memories as an 11-year-old in the 70s.
Well, the 70s, I remember sort of the decade from when I was 10 to about 20. I remember with great clarity and affection, not only for the television, but also the artefacts and the confectionery. And my average day would be walking to school wearing my Clark's Wayfarers, I think, the shoes with the compass in the heel. Very useful that was, just in case I got lost. And also those little footprints of badges, which you could leave in the show. And I'm pleased to see you're still wearing them now, Michael. Also then, you know, at playtime, I'd stuff my face with jelly tots or Aztec bars or things things like that. And I too would play with my clackers or my space opera before a sadistic nun stopped me. And then I might go home and play with my Etch-a-Sketch, which we all remember as being crap, because you could never do anything on it at all. And then I'd sit down and maybe have a big handful of fruit salads, which were my favourite sweets. And then I'd eat some Heinz toast toppers, if people remember those. And they tasted delicious, but they just looked like dog sick. They really did. So I'd settle down in front of the telly to watch, I don't know, Catweasel or How, or my favourite has to be my most evocative memory of kids' TV then was something called Hector's House.
No, she isn't there. I'm going to catch you!
You didn't catch me this time, Hector.
I've still got another chance. There is still Kiki, you know. And, I don't think I'll have much trouble catching her. Oh, where did you spring from?
You're well and truly beaten. I'm afraid you've lost, Mr. Hector. So that means you're still it.
Oh, yes, I'm still it. I am a beaten old Hector. I'm still it.
It just looks like one of Cynthia Payne's house parties, that doesn't it? It's bizarre, ménage à trois.
Were you a trendy little chap with your little jacket that you used to wear in those days?
I had school uniform. I suppose the trendiest thing I would have worn when I was about 11 or 12 was a tank top. I'm sure people will remember, they used to be in the most hideous colours. I guess I started to think about trendiness in general and dancing when I saw a very specific episode of Blue Peter. That's a very pure sort of crystalline memory in my youth, and I tried to do that, tried to copy that routine in a youth club once, and I was beaten up.
That affected thousands of young lives, didn't it? But if you thought that was cool, you should have seen Magpie on the other side, presented by Jenny Handy and Mick Robinson. Now, Jenny, you were the sort of radical alternative, weren't you?
I don't know about radical, but certainly stayed with the times. I don't think I owned a bra at that time. I certainly wasn't into burning one. The only time I had to put one on was when it was cold filming on the river. And that was because otherwise we got letters.
I'm going to sit and think about that for several minutes. You mentioned a favourite TV show. Which was your actual top show?
Oh, my absolute favourite, and I think it's a sort of a benchmark for absolute joie de vivre and slapstick, and informs much of the kind of 90s slapstick, has to be Tiswas, without a doubt.
Right, very quickly, I must say hello to a few people who've written in. Must say hello to Jackie Green from Stoke-on-Trent. It says, "Dear Chris, I thoroughly enjoy your programme. It's very fun. I love all the cartoons. I like Hoodie Elbow. I like Flanny Folks. But I don't understand why Sally James never gets a custard pie."
I do.
Well, I think we can clear that up. So no problem. Now, there's another one here from Billy Thorpe of Woolpit. Now, he says, "Could you please do me a favour, Chris? I thoroughly enjoy the show. I like Algernon Razzmatazz. Who is the Phantom Flamfling?" He says, a big PS at the end. But why doesn't Sally James get enough custard pie? Do I think that's fairly straight. It's you, Dan, Billy. As you know, I'm afraid we try and help people. Tony West from Liverpool's with me saying, "Last week Chris had a lot of spaghetti poured over him. I love things like that, but it would please me much more if Sally J." Well, I think we can arrange that. That shouldn't be any problem.
Sally James, you've had your nose reset and you've had your hair washed, but do you ever miss the Phantom Flan Flinger?
Well, I certainly don't miss the semolina. The semolina was much worse than the spaghetti, I have to tell you. Yes, of course I miss the Phantom Flamflinger. I mean, he was a superstar. It was just such a privilege and a joy to work with such a wonderful human being. But I must say that Tiswas did unleash a weird thing in a lot of people. Wherever we went, we found that it sort of crept into our private lives. People used to sort of come along and they'd see us and they'd immediately think that we wanted to start slinging custard pies or buckets of water around and just behave in a really stupid manner. And I can remember one evening being at the Dorchester at a very sort of posh music awards dinner, and I walked out to go to the ladies and walked past the bar, and a group of people were in there, and they immediately burst into our hit of the bucket of water song, and someone came rushing up with an ice bucket full of ice cold water and just chucked it over me, and there I was dripping wet for the rest of the evening. It used to sort of just make people a little bit mental, really.
Tony, when, if ever, did you graduate to more grown-up programmes?
Oh, well, when my testicles dropped, I suppose. I mean, it's true, when, you know, puberty and adolescence. Funnily enough, my testicles dropped very loudly one night.
So dropping quite loudly at the moment.
And then, of course, I started shaving, and the very Proustian kind of memories you have of things like denim aftershave. Clearly, Michael, for, you know, denim, Michael, is for the man, as you remember, who doesn't have to try too hard and get your hand slapped. And then I remember once putting high karate down the front of my trousers, you know, for those because the hormones are coursing through your system as an adolescent, and I passed out because a lot of aftershaves then, of course, used to smell of aviation fuel, and of course the evening would start with me, you know, in the bath with soap on a rope. I never quite figured out what to do, because that was a very 70s thing, soap on a rope. I never quite figured out what to do with the rope, but I had a lot of fun experimenting in the bath anyway. And then it would be sort of more fashion time, and so I did have the brushed velvet loons. They were from C&A. They had little bells on the side. They were called jinglers, and they were dreadful. They were really ghastly. And I had an Afghan coat, which my sister loaned me, so I was a bit of a hippie, but that used to stink, as all Afghan coats did, and so my mum used to spray it with fresh air, sort of industrial strength toilet cleaner, and so I just used to smell awful, especially with a cheesecloth shirt, which always used to go yellow under the armpits, and it used to be really hard, and you had to crack away at the armpits with a chisel. Really, really horrible stuff. So they're my general memories, but in terms of television, I suppose I graduated onto sort of groovy, cool things like the New Avengers and Jason King and The Professionals, but my all-time favourite, you know, for real grittiness and action and just brilliant acting was The Sweeney.
So after Dixon, Doc Green and Z-Cars, it does really seem like an authentic style of cop show. Was it like that, Dennis?
Was it authentic or like that?
Did it feel that?
It was like that.
Yes.
We had advisors, police advisors. We had an official one and an unofficial one who told us how we should really do it, which did make it sort of authentic, I think, don't you?
Yeah.
And, I mean, the comeback from the police was, at first they were a bit worried about it, that the policemen were rushing around fighting as hard as the villains were, but then I think they agreed that the public might as well know that the police can handle it. And, I mean, one of the big comments we got from a lot of policemen who we met, obviously, was like, I wish I hadn't done that in that bar last night. My wife knows, oh, no. Their big worry is their wife would find out what they do after work.
Of course, it was a new kind of language too, wasn't it? That was pretty tough.
Tremendous. I mean, it was just so exciting to watch, and I thought the acting was great, and they seemed to be really cool characters. And Reagan and all the people always used to be eating bacon rolls while driving with one hand and swearing at each other, which I found really, really exciting.
So what else did you watch, Tony? It only leaves the ads, doesn't it?
It only leaves the ads, really. And I think for me, personally, and I think probably for a lot of people, they're the most powerfully evocative things, like the martini ads of the 70s with their very garish colours, and you just had to drink a martini and suddenly you were whisked to a castle in a balloon, because that was the high life. And if you smoked a very weedy-looking mannequin cigar, suddenly a topless girl in quite baggy panties would come along the beach and fall into the water. These things happened. That was the simple universe then. Nowadays, things like chocolate bars, there's a girl in an overflowing bath and a lizard clambering over a phone, and it's all very kind of symbolic. But in the old days, there were things like the Yorkie ad bar, which I can't get out of my mind. I remember the ditty went, good, rich and thick, a milk chocolate brick. Each bite a tasty big mouthful. Well, we're back to Cynthia again, but... Just great simplicity. But the ads that sum it up for me, I have to say, are the Smash robots, and for me, voice of a generation, the shake and vac woman.
Stale smells up here often come from down there, and your carpet smells from your dog, and tobacco too. Well, shake and vac from Glade is here. It's all you have to do. Do the shake and vac. Do the shake and vac and put the freshness back. When you want no fresh, your room does too. Every time you vacuum, remember what to do. Do the shake and vac and put the freshness back. Shake and vac, the new carpet and room freshener from Glade.
Jenny Logan, you on this shake and vac. No.
It's me.
What was it about that ad that makes it so unforgettable?
I think it used to drive people mad. But whatever it did, it was good. It ran for 9 years. They played it for 9 years, that ad. And everybody knows the song.
Well, I've been grateful for your insights, as you might have imagined. I've called you intimately Tony. Tony Slattery, of course, I've been addressing all this time. Thank you very much. And just for you here now is a commercial break. Now, we are ripe for expansion on TV. In the 70s was sport, and there was a lone frontiersman who saw a gap in the market and plunged in. Tackling the BBC head-on, he gave his audience ringside entertainment that had never been witnessed on screen before.
And here he comes, a wave of the Union Jack, and Eddie Kidd, the London Kid, is going to try and beat the evil record. He's got to get in at full power at the 17-foot takeoff, and I think he's made it. He's done it clean and so simply. He's into the ditch at the bottom there.
What a posting.
And under the bell. So welcome live to Ali Pali, where it really is all happening here. The news of the world final. You might as well call it the nudes of the world. We've just had a streaker. It really is absolutely electric. Now Chapman. Really hitting these pedals. 100!
And the man we have to thank for bringing darts, snooker, wrestling and other esoteric sports to prime-time TV is the former head of ITV Sport, John Bromley, OBE. John, why did you go for these oddities?
Well, when we opened the book, when we started the programme, Michael, there wasn't much in the book. The BBC had got most of the contracts, and we had to look around for something different. And I think, in some ways, at those days, we were the sun and mirror to the sort of Telegraph and Mail of the BBC. But I remember that darts, and Eric here has now become a famous star on darts. The chap from the News of the World walked in the office one day in this very building and said, would we like to put darts on television? And we said, no, not really, old chap, but have a cup of coffee and, we'll see you out in about 10 minutes. Anyway, just as he went out the door, he produced these amazing pictures of 12,000 people in Alexandra Palace watching chaps throw the arrows. And we said to ourselves, well, if 12,000 people are watching these chaps, this must be a TV show. And that's how the first darts tournament ever got on the telly.
And the whole thing was an instant success, not just darts, but all the different stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. And snooker was another one. We used to do it in black and white, which is a bit tricky in those days.
Which takes us neatly into our next subject, comedy. It was a decade that started with Python, discovered the goodies and gave birth to Not the 9 O'Clock News. Even mainstream shows of the day are considered cultish now.
Sharing a flat with a bird? Yeah, suggestive biscuits, eh?
Do you take sugar?
Yeah, it's her. Who's she then?
Huh? She's the other girl that shares a flat.
True, you've landed on your feet, haven't you?
Eh?
2 birds in a flat? You can't be short of it.
Well, you know how it is.
No, I don't. Tell me.
Well, they do pester me a little bit, but you see, I've got this rota system worked out, you see. Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays for the blonde bit, right?
Yeah.
Tuesdays, Thursdays and Fridays.
Yeah, go on. And the dark bit gets her share the other nights, eh?
Hello, mate, Eddie Boone. Next door. Just the... Just sort of pop round and say hello. Hey, you like it here, mate? We're a nice crowd. I'm going to the line in a minute for a pint.
Excuse me, Mr.
All right, cop, you carry on. Don't let me stop you working. You must come round and meet the wife.
Hey, mate, you got the wrong man. I'm just a furniture remover.
And?
I'm not the one who's moving in here.
Well, who is moving in here, then?
Mr. Booth, I'm your new neighbour.
Bloody no. I've been integrated.
Well, let me tell you, Mr. Lottie-Dargana Graham, we British is the master's year. And as long as that Union Jack continues to fly from that... What is that?
It looks like the Indian national flag, Sergeant Major.
The Indian national, shut up. They've done it again. They've done it again. Get it down, get it down! Chop the bloody pole down!
Once again, British ingenuity and cunning have got the better of these damn natives.
Well, now, Jimmy Perry and David Croft wrote It Ain't Half Hot, Mum, and we watched it in all innocence. The view now is that it's too controversial to be shown again. Isn't that right, Jimmy?
Well, sadly, people think it's racist. But why David Croft and I created it was because we wanted to show in some way why there are Asians living in this country and who regard themselves as British, because people don't really understand our history, that for 200 years, over 200 years, we ruled the whole Indian subcontinent. And it was just a gentle look at the last days of the British Raj, because I ran that concert party. I was in India for 3 years, and all those characters really existed. And the sad thing is that Michael Bates, you see, in 1972, when we first thought of it, there were very, very few Asian actors. And Michael Bates, who was born in Jhansi in India and spoke fluent Urdu and was in the Gurkhas during the war, he fitted into the part beautifully, because we could not, in those days, find an Indian or Pakistani actor to play the part.
Now, Rudolph Walker starred in Love Thy Neighbour. What did you think about it then, and what do you think now?
Well, there's no comparison. I mean, it's like asking what I thought of the American actors and actresses in the 30s and 40s who, the mamas and the papas. It worked beautifully then. I mean, it was first of its kind, and it was acceptable. I think I endorse what was said earlier on, that it probably wouldn't work today. It's sad, but, I think tensions are far greater today than it was in the 70s.
Vince Powell, you wrote Love Thy Neighbour, and the theme, of course, was racism. We saw that bit about, I've been integrated. Were there any complaints at the time?
Well, yes, I'd take issue with you when you say the theme was racism. It wasn't racism. You must remember that in those days, in the early 70s, there was a lot of unrest, there was a lot of immigrants coming into the country, and I decided, with my late partner, to expose bigotry. And if you look at Love Thy Neighbour, it's not a racist show, because the white man was made to look a fool and an idiot, and the black man always won. And for all the complaints we had from the so-called race relations board about why does the white guy call him Sambo, nobody said, why does the black guy call the white man Honky? He's calling him a pig, And the strange thing about that show was the black community thought it was their show. They loved it. The whole of the black community of England thought it was their show. And it was never out of the top 5 for 5 years, so somebody must have liked it, whether there was a complaint or not. And I think it could still go on today, personally.
Let me ask Paula Wilcox about Man About the House. Paula, how far do you think that reflected the attitudes of the time?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it was a very funny show. I think the only way in which perhaps it reflected some attitudes, and in quite a clever way, was that it showed the attitudes of the older people who lived downstairs, who thought that young people couldn't be sharing a flat upstairs without a lot of hanky-panky going on. And the attitude of the young people was very innocent, actually. And I think it kind of is like the confusion that you were mentioning at the start of the show, the confusion around those issues. And later on in the 70s, I did a series called Miss Jones and Son, which was about an unmarried mother. And that, I was shocked by the controversy that aroused at the time. And, you know, you had a former Miss World talking about having to resign because of being an unmarried mother. And I think there was a lot of really strong feelings about all that. And Man About the House seemed to kind of turn things on its head and say, or turn things on their head and say that, you know, here were these young people living in a flat and nothing was happening, and the older people couldn't believe that. So it was reflecting the confusion that you were talking about earlier.
Yes. One TV classic from the 70s that everyone agrees on is Fawlty Towers. Now, Andrew Sachs, you were a stalwart of the series. Was it funny to make?
Funny? Yes, I guess it was. It was certainly fun to make. We all had a great time. I did, certainly. It was the first time I'd been a regular character in a series, so I came to it new. But I remember at the early days, I thought it was good, but none of us really knew how good it was going to be. And I remember turning to a cameraman who was, of course, used to seeing series from his angle. And I said to him, "Do you think this is a good one, this series?" He said, "Oh, yes, this is special." And I still remember that, and it turned out to be so, yes.
But you suffered, too. Physically, I mean.
Well, John Cleese has asked me to say, no, it didn't hurt.
But it did?
All right, I'll confess. Okay, well, he was very nice and gentle in the rehearsals. But come the show, he would let rip a bit. And I said to him, one day, "John, do you actually have to hit me quite so hard?" And he said, "Andrew, what is the matter with you? It's not a long run in the West End, so one night only. Now pull yourself together. No makes So he forgave me.
Well, you have our sympathy. In fact, we're so sympathetic, we're going to watch it all over again.
Morning, Foggy.
Really, Andre, he's wonderful.
This Basil's wife. This Basil. This smack on head.
One show that's seen several decades come and go is Top of the Pops. In the 70s, it was a good chance of catching a bit of glam rock. We'll be hearing more about what made glam glitter and the shockwaves caused by punk music next. But first, a quintessential sound of the 70s. Mud, Glorious Mud, and Tiger Feet. an expert to give us a dissertation on the trouble with the 70s music scene, and my goodness, he should know. Please welcome Master of Arts, Trinity College, Cambridge, Professor Jonathan King.
Basically, what happened to the music in the 70s was that the real talent that had come through in the 60s died off or got married or drugged out or became bored. And the empty space on the charts was filled by the Division 2 talent that had been trying and failing and waiting. Paul Raven, the warm-up man for Ready, Steady, Go in the 60s, became Gary Glitter for the 70s. John's Children, a 60s flop group, turned into T-Rex. A couple of backing musicians for Long John Baldry became Elton John and Rod Stewart. A failed mime artist decided to be David Bowie. And where youthful musical ability and talent had dominated the 60s, marketing men took over the 70s. Chaz Chandler, the bass player with the Animals, magically changed into Chaz Chandler, who marketed and promoted Slade. Mickey Most, a singer from the 60s, produced Mud, Suzi Quatro, Hot Chocolate and others. And best of all, a singer, writer, producer from the 60s who'd had a few hits like Everyone's Gone to the Moon and It's Good News Week, a spotty Cambridge undergraduate, became super marketing man Jonathan King. Not only did I merchandise myself with Una Paloma Blanca and Lucy Love and Sugar, Sugar and It's the Same Old Song, do I hear applause? But I built supergroups like the Piglets and St. Cecilia. Remember Leap Up and Down and Wave Your Knickers in the Air? Not to mention Genesis and 10cc and the Bay City Rollers. It's not generally known that their first hit, Keep On Dancing, featured 13 vocals by Jonathan King and only one Bay City Roller. Oh, the 70s were great fun, but glam rock was the product of clever marketing. Then along came punk. A breath of fresh air, the voice of youth, the angry howl of rebellion. But it was all a fake. I was the original punk because I believed you could sell the public anything. And I did so from the Rocky Horror Show to Pterodactyl and the Dinosaurs. And punk actually stemmed totally from the sales and promotional ability of shrewd operators who worshipped me. Like Malcolm McLaren and Chris Thomas, who created terrific tracks like Anarchy in the UK and found charismatic actors like Johnny Rotten and Sid Vicious to play the parts of the Sex Pistols. Delightful, delicious, different, but only the latest Frankenstein creation of us 60s kids. My advice to the young of today is prize our wrinkled, skeletal, bony fingers from around the throats of your enthusiasm and your energy, push us to one side and take over the world of music, because the curse of the 90s and the 80s and the trouble with the 70s was and is domination by the 60s. Thank you.
And he means that most sincerely. Now, Noddy Holder, Slade had a string of hits in the 70s. Do you take what Jonathan says seriously?
Well, Jonathan, as usual, is talking out of his backside, as he always does. Well, what you failed to mention, Jonathan, was you still got to write great songs and make great records, so you're putting down all the people that bought those records.
Oh, no, but they were great records. You made some brilliant records.
You didn't say that, though.
Oh, but there were lots of great records in the 70s, but none of the stars were really huge stars. I mean, you've got to admit, no matter how well...
Elton John and Rod Stewart and David Bowie and Led Zeppelin weren't big stars.
Compared to megastars like Paul McCartney, they mean nothing.
Oh, you are talking ridiculous.
Well, they were only rejects from the 60s anyway. Be honest.
Get away with it.
Hang on, let's get the other point of view. Bob Harris, your old grey whistle test, of course, was the authoritative voice of authentic rock in the period of the 70s. What's your view of Professor King's view?
Well, a lot of the seeds of the music that developed in the early part of the 70s were definitely sown in the 60s. There's no doubt about that. You know, as Jonathan was saying about people like Elton John, it's not that they were failed beforehand. They were more kind of learning their craft, I would say, and they happened to come into popularity in the early part of the 70s. But the early part of the 70s was also a very sort of fragmented time. There are lots of different styles of music coming through at that time. I mean, we seem to have moved further and further down the line and away from rock and roll. And rock and roll, to me, was always about sort of, I don't know, 1 minute, 50 seconds of absolute energy.
But that's what glam was about as well.
Yes,
glam
it
was about energy and show business.
T-Rex, Slade, you know, you look back at those singles now and they're terrific singles. I mean, it's a funny thing that you know, you look back over the years And somehow all music from the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, you know, as you look back on it, it gradually all melds together. In a sense, this programme, with all of us sitting here, is an example of that, with the Bay City Rollers, with the Pistols, with Slade, with Mud, with the Damned, all featured on the same programme. At the time, we probably wouldn't have been seen in the same television studio with one another, but you look back on things, and records become either great records or not. You either like them or you don't. And through the 70s, there were a fantastic number of really good records, and punk.
None of Jonathan King's, I may add.
We have a Sex Pistol with us tonight, as you've said, but before I unleash him, although he's a gentle fella, let us remind ourselves of the sheer energy which was generated by this phenomenon called punk. Most of the energy seemed to involve the cameramen and the audience there, but we saw Glenn Matlock on bass guitar. Glenn, what is your answer to what has been said by Jonathan about manufactured music?
Well, I agree with Noddy totally about what Jonathan had to say, but I also agree with Bob here, because to me the 70s can be split into two separate groups, really. There was up to like the mid-70s with all the glam thing, and then the punk thing came along, and we was just trying to get like a back to the 50s almost thing, that the freshness and the energy of rock and roll without all the crap that went with it.
Oh, but come on, Glenn, it wasn't you were puppets. Malcolm put the Sex Pistols together. It was great music, brilliant records, terrific display on stage, it all worked wonderfully, but you were just playing the part.
No, but you know that if you're going to have to sell something, you've got to have something good to sell in the first place.
Completely agree.
Well, we had the real bare basics there that was something that could really be believed in, and I think that's today by bands like the grunge bands and all that, just cite the Sex Pistols and all the punk thing as major influences on.
No, I think it was great record and it was a marvellous time, but my argument is the people behind it were people who are now just about reaching their 50s, like some of us.
Well, possibly so, but I think what we did actually as young kids who are quite astute was realise that these people could help us in our quest in putting our music in front of a live audience.
I think you realise this, don't you? Yes, I think both points are valid. There was a lot of stars created out of the punk movement, and terrific too, but it was the people from the 60s who were behind it.
Well, what about Epstein?
No, I think we used them, actually,
Epstein was behind the Beatles. They would have never broken through with that Epstein.
Yeah, but at least he was a 60s person. I mean, the people behind the 60s band were 60s people.
Not all of them.
Now, Chris Miller, I met you in your persona as Rat Scabies, of course, of the Damned, and we had a nice cup of tea, as I recall. You're busy still, but what was the reason for the sort of repulsiveness of what you did and all the spitting and all that? Was that part of youthful expression and fun?
Well, I don't know about, why people did it, but I do know that the one thing that was important about it was the fact that any of the current stars that were around at the time, the people that were regarded as highly talented musically, which were like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Yes, Genesis, those kind of guys, you weren't allowed to go and spit at them, shout at them, and what's more, you couldn't stand next to them at the bar before a show. These guys, they can all talk about their great life and Jonathan King and the Archies and Johnny Reggae and Slade or Mud or any of those guys, but the real thing, none of that was mine. That was the previous generations, and when it came to like being in the Damned and being like in a band, that was like my generation speaking. That was my own voice. I didn't need to practice in a bedroom for 15 years to go and play in a pub full of people, and that was kind of what we were about.
There was, of course, one particular incident involving the Sex Pistols that really grabbed the headlines. Afterwards, their name was on everyone's lips.
Now, I want to know one thing.
What?
Are you serious, or are you just trying to make me laugh?
Go on.
Really?
Yeah.
No, but I mean about what you're doing.
Oh, yeah.
You are serious? Beethoven, Mozart, Bach and Brahms have all died.
Ours, aren't they?
Really?
Oh,
what are we saying, sir?
Wonderful people.
Are they?
Oh, yes, they really turn us on.
What they do?
Well, suppose they turn other people on.
That's just their tough treat.
It's what?
Nothing, a rude word. Next question.
No. What was the rude word?
Shit.
Was it really? Good heavens.
And that was followed, as history showed, by even ruder words. The headlines were extraordinary. The Sex Pistols are sent packing, said the Daily Mirror. The Sun called it a filthy show. And Bill Grundy said, I did it to show they are just foul-mouthed yobs. So now, Glenn, was it a deliberate setup?
Not at all. We was rehearsing to do this thing called the Anarchy Tour. And as I understand it, we only got the show at the very last minute because Queen had pulled out. We didn't even want to do it, actually, because there was this limo outside and we thought, well, we shouldn't really be seen in this big Daimler. So he wasn't going to do it. But Malcolm turned around and said, well, if you don't do it, you don't get your wages this week. So he was in the car like a shot. And it took us about 5 minutes to go from the front door into the thing, and we was recording straight away. So there was no way it was set up whatsoever at all. And as you can see from that clip, that Bill manufactured the whole thing, really. I think the whole thing with John just backing up what he said was that it was a no-nonsense approach and he wouldn't be pandered to or I don't know quite what the right word is, but made to look stupid in front of somebody of the older generation. He just backed himself up, and that's what kids liked. They could identify with that. They didn't want all the crap. They didn't want all the stardom and all the glitz and all the glitter. The glam rock thing was fun, but that was a few years previous. And now they wanted something new. There was a different climate in England, and kids wanted to pick up on what we were doing. We didn't sort of manufacture this whole thing. We found that as soon as we started playing, there was a whole coterie and a crowd of people who were really looking for change in the music scene, and they just gravitated towards us.
I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but Jonathan, are you prepared to concede any of these points?
Oh, my point is the same. I thought punk was a marvellous time and lots of great music. Was it manufactured or was it natural? I thought it was manufactured. They say it's natural. Fair enough. We agree to differ.
Thank you. Well, music is always the strongest way of recalling any period, and as our studio could well do with a bit of refurbishing, I'm going to do the decent thing and ask the damned, just for old time's sake, to smash it up. From the 70s, goodbye.
Maybe it's as cold as past beating flame. Now I don't even care if I look a mess. Don't wanna be a sucker like all the rest. Ooh, smash it up, smash it up, smash it up. Ooh, smash it up, yeah, smash it up, smash it up, smash it up, smash it up. Dance to a different song. I'm gonna scream and shout to my name well. I'm gonna smash it up till there's nothing left. Ooh, smash it up, smash it up, smash it up. Ooh, smash it up, smash it up, smash it up, smash it up. Ooh, smash it up, smash it up.
record too. Why don't